My name is Lee Smith. I'm from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm a data center design and resilience and operational excellence consultant. I look at data centers every day of my life to see what's wrong, what can be improved, what can we learn. And I love what I do. I am very fortunate I don't have to force myself to go to work in the mornings. I have an absolute passion for data centers. Today I'm going to talk to you about the fallacy of data center site resilience, certified facilities, and the human factor. I can probably change the word fallacy to pitfalls. I am an accredited tier designer. I'm a certified TIA 942 design consultant as well. I've done 5 tier certifications with organizations in South Africa, ranging from design all the way through to facility certification. Just to get that slide out of the way, vendor neutral. If anybody has a problem with any of the slides, please do take note. The African excuse is it wasn't me, it was someone else. But please feel free to raise it with me at that time. I've been in IT now, or in data centers, or in and around data centers since 1989. I started as a tape jockey, loading tape reels and printer paper in an old Sperry Univac mainframe in South Africa. And what I've found out is that we as people and the world has become so interconnected with each other and with information and with data that it's difficult for us to separate ourselves from what it is that we do. Think about it. We are connected to each other through our devices. I call them faux devices, FOE, front of eye devices. Because every time we need to do something, a screen has to be front of eye. Machines talk to each other. People talk to machines. Organizations talk to each other through machines. We solve problems, we antagonize, we wage war. All of these things are done today through ones and zeros. And every time we do something, when it comes to ones and zeros and binary, we expect something to happen, a result, either success or fail, whatever the case may be. So I'd like you to think about what was needed for you to be here today. What had to happen? All the things that had to be put in place to happen successfully for you to be able to sit here today listening to what I have to say. Flights, hotels, airline check-in, baggage handling, departures, arrivals, passport control, customs, TSA, homeland security, talking to people on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, downloading Netflix movies because the in-flight entertainment is not always that good. So we have that. TripAdvisor to find the restaurants. And I hear Coyote Ugly was humming again last night. So I wasn't there. Air traffic control. All of these things. All of it. How many data centers and IT systems were required so that you could sit here today? What if anything on that list and then some failed to perform? The importance of data centers, as far as I'm concerned, is self-evident because our devices are connected to each other. We are connected through our devices. Data centers, no matter where they are, no matter how big, no matter how small, enable us to do what we need to do every day of our lives. No matter what gets done, there's always at least 1 or 2 data centers involved in that activity, not to mention the telecommunications infrastructure that gets with it as well. Most of what we do is made possible through technology that we find in data centers. Now this slide I wrote in December last year as part of my introduction to this presentation. That's the slide that went up at the keynote on Tuesday morning. I think those first 2 bullet points say basically the same thing. Without data centers today, we would not accomplish what we would like. So that led me to realize that data centers are not in the business of providing a service on its own. We're actually in the business of trust. Because when people do things, bless you, when people do things and a data center is involved, they expect a result that they can trust. Something must happen. And failure, as we all know, in any way, shape, or form, impacts trust. And that brings me to the triangle of trust that I will talk about a little bit later in my presentation. In December or November last year, I started sending out these teasers on Twitter and LinkedIn talking about souffles, data centers, and mountain bikes. Now, I confess I'm not a kitchen person. I have friends that are, but I do like my mountain biking. But how are these related to data centers? Let's start with souffles and data centers. This is a souffle recipe. There we go. You've got butter, you've got lemons, you have free-range eggs. By the way, Sheldon Cooper, fun fact, did you know that there's a visible difference between a free-range egg and what they call a caged egg? I didn't. The one is more orange and the other one is more yellow. So there we go. Now you can impress your friends, but first you have to break the egg to see what the color is, unfortunately. You've got sugar, corn flour, normal flour, double cream, full-fat milk, icing sugar. And then there's a method of how to put all of these ingredients together in a certain way in order for you to get to the end product, which is a beautiful, light, fluffy, delicious souffle. And if you're not sure how to do some of those things, well, there are some videos that can help you to whisk the egg in the correct manner and to prepare the ramekin. I call it a bowl, they call it a ramekin, whatever. All of these things you need. So it's easy. You just download the recipe from the internet, off you go into the kitchen, you chuck all of these things together, you follow the process, you stick it in the oven, and when it comes out, it's beautiful, especially for the first timer. Not so fast. But the recipe said, I followed all the steps. But did you use the right ingredients? Some are superior, some are inferior. Did you measure correctly? How could it fail? I put it at the right heat in the oven. What went wrong? The recipe makes it look so simple. To make a souffle, it's more than just the recipe. It's about ingredients, skill level, having the right utensils, understanding the methodology that needs to be applied, experience, aptitude, your knowledge and understanding, correct measurements, quality, monitoring, many other things that come into play so that you, at the end of the day, can pull out the souffle as was on the previous picture. Data center recipes are abundant. It's the easiest thing today to find a recipe off the internet and download it so that you can go out and bake a data center. You can find them at all of those and then some. Numerous references about the recipe to bake a data center. Mission critical, tier 3, tier 4, 2n+1, whatever. So let's have a look at how do we make a resilient mission critical data center. First of all, you need free range utility power. Free range. Now, in case you didn't know, yes, there is free range power. That's what it looks like. That's caged. So preferably you want free range power. You need a lot of other things. UPSs, generators, switchgear, power distribution, equipment racks, HVAC, thermal management, fire, suppression, detection, networking equipment, cabling reticulation, BMS, DSIM. A lot of ingredients needs to get put into the mix before you can come up with a well-baked data center. So let's have a look at this recipe. Well, you take power utility and a generator, you connect it to some switchgear. For the critical load, you slap in either a static or a rotary UPS, or sometimes both. Power reticulation all the way through into the data center. For the non-critical load, you can either have a UPS again as well, as long as it's a rotary. You have power distribution units, chiller infrastructure, air conditioning, CRAS, cracks. Connect to the rack through the power rail. Do the same for the other side. Call the one A, call the other one B. Add fire suppression, networking, reticulation, DSIM, BMS to taste. It's that simple, isn't it? I don't think so. There's a lot more that the recipe does not tell you about. How do you size the power? How do you design and size your HVAC? What solutions do you need for your specific data center requirements? Because there's no such thing nowadays as a bad product, but there are poor solutions. Because just because the product is good doesn't mean it's going to fit the solution for yourself or your client. You need to understand how to apply these things. You need experienced people. You need to understand detailed design. You need to talk about PUE and WUE and CUE and all of these other efficiencies that we want to use nowadays, because the data center has to use less energy. Planning, engineering, resilience, picking the right components. The process and methodology, depending on the components, depending on the approach, is different every time. I have never ever designed or been involved in a data center build that was done exactly the same way as the previous one. The recipe always changes. Quality assurance, different operating procedures, commissioning, fire detection. The list goes on and on and on. Most recipes don't cover that. You need to get people involved that understand what needs to be done. So you need suitably qualified, experienced, and skilled professionals. Those who understand the recipe, not just those who can read it. Because I can read a souffle recipe. I just showed you one. I promise you, it has not been successful. Because when things go wrong, no one cares how much you saved, whether it's in time or resources or money. Because where I come from, unfortunately, we always try and figure out, is there a less expensive way? There's never a cheap path. It's just less expensive. And sometimes we cut corners and we decide to do things that is not in the recipe, or we're trying to save time. You might save money up to a certain point. After that, when things go wrong, no one cares. No one. Let's talk about mountain bikes and data centers. This is my mountain bike. Shot just outside of Cape Town. That's the sea. We still don't have water down there, so that's a bit of a problem. So 100-year drought has caught everybody unawares, and all the data centers are nervous. That's me riding my bike. It was a race that I rode in 2016 in the Drakensberg in South Africa. It was a 3-day stage race. But that's the bike. The bike is made up of numerous components. The bike that I selected suits me, suits my riding style. You've got frame types, wheel sizes, bike geometry, specialist equipment, gears, levers, brakes, disc brakes. I have to choose certain gear ratios for my pedal stroke, for the length of my leg, seats, socks, shocks, handlebars. All of these things together are parts in their own that form and have a function on the bike. They all contribute to the bike working as intended, if I operate the bicycle in the right way. If I don't, there's a risk of things might fail. I have to do everything on this bike within the parameters for which that bicycle has been designed. But the bike and the components alone is not going to get me through the race. Just because I have a good bike doesn't mean I'm going to finish. Doesn't mean I'm going to stay up. Doesn't mean it's not going to break. There's a rider involved as well. I need to understand as a rider the terrain. And sometimes the terrain is the same, but just the change in weather changes the circumstances as to which I must handle the terrain. I need to be fit. You don't go cycle a 220-kilometer race, I don't know, that's about 160 miles, I think, in 3 days just because you feel like it. And I promise you, I have a well-developed girth. It's executive muscle, all right? So I had to do a lot of training before I could actually go and do that race. And it still wasn't easy, but I made it. Planning, anticipation, looking at the route, reacting to certain events, because sometimes you might be on the same path. You've ridden this track for months, for years, but tomorrow there's a branch in the path that wasn't there yesterday, and you need to be able to respond. And your experience helps you to deal with these obstacles. You sometimes have to look at lines through specific obstacles in order for you to pick one that will give you the least level of resistance and that you can stay up. It's also about those who maintain the bike. I can do certain things on my bike. I have that skill. But when it comes to tweaking the derailleur on the bike at the back or things like that, and my shocks need a little bit of fixing or repair, I take it to specialists. I don't do that stuff. I'm not qualified. It doesn't matter how many YouTube videos I do and I watch, I cannot take a shock apart and put it back together again. I always end up with 3 parts lying on the table wondering, where did those come from? It's about sometimes falling off and then having a road back to recovery. It happens. It's not just the bike, it's not the rider, it's everything. All the aspects working as a system. A data center is exactly the same. It's not just about the design. It's not just about site selection, operations. It's not just about parts, maintenance, all of these other silos that we look at sometimes individually. It's about everything that makes the entire data center system work as required. This is generally recognized as one of the best designed and built vehicles in the world. Now, please do note, I say there, this slide content is not an endorsement. I do not own a Volvo. But when you say the word Volvo, there is something that goes off in everybody's minds. It's good. It's well engineered. It's safe. All of these wonderful attributes that the vehicle has. That's great. But what about the driver? And you will see equal opportunity offender. How safe is that vehicle now? Does the engineering take that into consideration when it's built in the factory, when it comes off the factory floor? Because it's not just about the vehicle. You also need suitable skills and correct execution for any mission-critical responsibility. And driving a vehicle from A to B, I regard as a mission-critical responsibility. You do not want to fail, especially when you have precious cargo like family or something like that in the vehicle as well. Or in my case, my bike on the back. That's very precious. Because having that on its own and looking at the vehicle's capability and its design and its engineering is a false sense of security. You fool yourself in believing that this thing on its own is going to do what you expect it to do if you don't treat it and use it in the right manner, especially when it functions within a mission-critical system. The same philosophy applies to mission-critical data centers. There's no difference. It doesn't matter how well designed your data center is, all the redundancy, all of these wonderful bells and whistles that you've built into the system, if you have that operating it. Because at the end of the day, depending on who you ask, 20 to 48% of data center outages are as a result of human error. Some say it's even as high as 70%. Let's stick with that number for the moment. These are the publicly declared outages for 2017. The big ones that hit the news. Quite a number of logos on there. Large organizations. Big data centers. Well designed. 38% of those outages were as a result of human error. Fat finger trouble. Which means, if you think about the operating budget for all of the data centers involved there, and you put all of that money together, the millions to operate the data centers in 2017, that money spent covered 62% of the risk. The other 38% was not covered. How's that possible? And there's a cost to downtime. It costs money. 2016, I'm sure many of you will remember the Delta outage. 800 flights that could not take off. The data center itself was down for 2 hours before it was reinstated. The data center was down for 2 hours. Cost to the organization, $150 million US. Southwest, same thing. 2017, the Amazon outage, where the storage and the infrastructure of a third of their infrastructure went walkabout for a couple of hours. I don't know how much it cost, but I'm sure it wasn't a small number. The most spectacular outage, in my view, for 2017 was the British Airways data center outage at Heathrow, where not one, but 6 data centers failed. One person went into one data center and accidentally shut down the wrong UPS during a change. That failed all the critical load in the one data center. 15 minutes later, panic-stricken, they reinstated the UPS in the wrong sequence. Power surged through the data center, blew half the kit. DR was not as good as they thought it was. The other 5 data centers could not take the load. The systems failed. Bankers' weekend in the UK is a big thing. It's a long weekend. People are flying to Spain. They're going away for the holidays. 70,000 passengers stranded at Heathrow Airport for 3 days. The data center could not recover. The systems could not recover. 100 million euros it cost BA. But that's just the organizational cost for the data center. There's more than that. It's not just about the data center's recovery and the cost to the organization. It's the time that's taken for the last IT system to fully reinstate and recover. Because just because the data center's up doesn't mean all the systems are up, doesn't mean all the end users are working. Because it's about every end user working at that same level of productivity before the incident happened. The loss of productivity during the restoration of these services and the operational cost thereafter to reinstate all services back to normal. It's not just the normal state of the data center. It's everything else that needs to be normal as a result of this data center. And that is the actual total cost of downtime. And no one can ever quantify that. It's not calculable because we don't know the impact of the end user to the end state when we lose a service or a data center. Not to mention that thing. Because for a while, I wasn't sure I wanted to fly BA. Question is, what are the root causes when a data center has an outage as a result of human error? Because human error is not the root cause. It is a symptom. What else failed, was ignored, or was neglected before the human dealt the final blow? There's a path usually that you can trace back. I always find myself asking these questions to my clients. and I want them to keep it in front of mind. What data center changes impact business or site risk, and also vice versa? What business changes impact the data center? Do we respond effectively as these requirements evolve, especially from the business perspective? We're always wondering, what is business going to do, and how am I going to serve my client as their requirements change? Do we find the gaps? Do we look at those single points of failure? Are they identified as things change, or are we sitting with the proverbial frog in the pot syndrome, where we don't realize the water is getting warmer and we don't get out? What about IT resilience? Is there a constant realignment of the data center design, the capacity, the operations with IT as well? Do we understand the interdependencies between these, specifically when it comes to sequencing during recovery operations? This is something I never ever see in procedures, what I refer to as RTNs, reinstate to normal. We have emergency procedures, we have disaster recovery procedures, we have all the procedures in the world, but when something goes wrong, we don't always have what we refer to as RTNs, which helps you to sequentially put the system back into a normal state the way that it was before. Because had the guys at BA have an RTN, the chances are they would not have messed up the reinstatement of the UPS. Are we continuously improving and redefining or refining and adapting our skills as needed? So a data center is just like mountain biking. There's lots of components and things involved for me, the bike, everything to be a success when I go on my ride or when I go on my race. There's no difference when it comes to a data center. The differentiator is fusing all of these things together so that the data center itself excels as a system. So next time when you see somebody on a mountain bike, think about the data center. The fallacy of the redundant data center. I've been involved in certifications in South Africa for a while now. I walk into data centers the whole time, and everybody shows me about the 2 generators and the 3 UPSs and the 3 pipes and the ring and all of this. But as Lee Kirby said, without a continual focus on operational improvement and fine-tuning, the natural state of any complex system, such as a data center facility, is decline. A highly redundant data center is not a guarantee against downtime. If you're going to do formal certification and rely on that alone, it has limited value. Operations, management, and leadership are always part of the mix. You need well-trained and skilled professionals because they are the contributors to your critical success factors. You have to have a quality culture and continuous operational improvement. What was good today is not necessarily going to be good tomorrow. It's about not what you have, it's what you do with it. So operate a resilient, mission-critical data center without suitably skilled, experienced, and qualified professionals at your peril. It will not end well. It never does. I always used to say, never say oops after you press enter, because then it's too late. Which brings me back to the triangle of trust. Over the last 8 years, I've done numerous operational assessments, audits, to help organizations understand their threats, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, and to improve. And I've looked at all of my reports a while ago, and I realized that there's a trend. There's a sequence. First of all, the red triangle there is what I refer to as the field of failure. The blue dot is the ambit of assuredness. That circle over there, or that border, that thin border, is what I refer to as the corona of comfort. And the green dot in the middle is the nucleus of nirvana. Yes, these are my words, and my daughter says I'm crazy, but hey, work with me. The trick is to keep that green dot exactly where it is. Because if you do that, you have that holy grail of data center requirements, and that is absolute stability. But that dot doesn't stay there just because it feels like it. You have to keep it there. There have to be certain forces that work in as vectors onto that dot to ensure that it stays there. And there are 3 of those that I have identified as the major vectors when it comes to the triangle of trust. And those 3 are that: resilience, data center skills, documentation. Now, resilience, you can see, those are big buckets. You can probably put everything or anything into those buckets, but at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. Resilience in your people, resilience in your data center, resilience in your systems. Your skills need to be resilient as well. You need to have the right skills on site for whatever it is that needs to be done. And the documentation itself also helps you to be resilient, have the right skills, do the right things, do the right operations, whatever is required. Those 3 things are the vectors that keep that green dot inside the nucleus of nirvana. Because what happens when one of these vectors starts showing a weakening? In this case, we're using data center skills. We've lost a little skill in the data center. People have left. We're not able to replace them. And that green dot usually starts moving towards the vector that is starting to fail, because the forces keeping the green dot there is getting less. And we start skirting the corona of comfort, where we find ourselves in areas what I've referred to as permissible deviation. Things start happening, but they deviate a little bit, but it's still okay. We're not in trouble yet. Semi-comfortable success. We're not completely proud of the way things have been done, but once again, we're telling ourselves, well, you know what, at least we didn't fail. But there's a potential for complacency, because as soon as you start testing the corona of comfort, and it moves there and you start getting away with it, you become complacent with the fact, well, that worked still, so I guess it must be okay. That force weakens even more. And then we move out of the corona of comfort and we find ourselves within the ambit of assuredness, suboptimal execution, uncomfortable success. We still made it, but we sure as heck don't feel good about it anymore. We know there's something wrong. We just can't put our finger on it. Near misses. Impactless incidents. Things go wrong. We lose a UPS string, for example, or a string on the batteries, but it doesn't affect the end user. It's an impactless incident. So we sort of tell ourselves, well, it's okay. And that's why I call it the ambit of assuredness, because we assure ourselves that everything is still all right. We usually walk around saying, well, you know what? It's okay. It's all good. We're still there. You know, we don't have to worry about it. We keep on assuring ourselves and our peers in the data center, but we are starting to test the field of failure. And of course, when it weakens to the point that we enter the field of failure, well, that's when everything goes sideways. Mission critical, reputational impact, unpredictable negative results and outcomes, unmitigated disasters, failed operational execution, customer and market dissatisfaction, missed SLAs, loss of trust, financial productivity losses. You can probably add a number of bullet points after that for yourself, because you're now in that area that you shouldn't have been ever. And it started with you just skirting the corona of comfort. And don't think because you can balance the vectors further down that that is going to help you to keep that dot inside where it's needed, because in that case what you usually find is something like that. It goes all over the place, and we usually find ourselves as data center people praying that the redundancy and the resilience of the site is going to save us from ourselves. It's a fallacy. It's not going to work. So for me, the data center is only as good as, yes, that initial design and build, and let's call that the resilience bucket for the moment. The operations, the support teams, the skills and the training that goes with it, and in there you could have vendors, let's call that the data center skills vector, and all your up-to-date and accessible site documentation, whatever that is. Whatever it is, whether it's from the generator, the transformer, all the way into the rack, it doesn't matter. Everything related to that site must be up to date and available to the relevant parties when they're looking for it. Because that's where we want to be. Continuous monitoring and control, predictable positive results. So when you start something, you know it's going to be a success because you've done this before. Good management and leadership, absolute trust and success, continuous service improvement, site and operational stability, relevant and current documentation, a culture of excellence. And you'll find what happens when you get to that level, a strange thing develops. These things actually start supporting each other. Because all of a sudden, the documentation that you have helps you with your resilience. It also assists you with the data center skills. The skills that you have assist with resilience and documentation. And all of these things start interacting and integrating with each other in a manner that your data center at the end of the day finds itself staying there. But these forces take work. It takes effort. This is not a one-day task. It takes a while. And once you're there, it's even harder to stay there. So, where's the green dot positioned in your data center? One of my senior directors many, many years ago in a company that I used to work, used to look at me and say, "Lee, do you sleep well on a stormy night? Are the barn doors closed? Is the wind going to rip open the door? Do you sleep well on a stormy night?" And if you could not say, "Yes, sir, I do sleep well on a stormy night," you went back to the drawing board and you started your plan all over again. So let's wrap up. The human factor's impact on operational risk is huge. Last year, it almost accounted for 40% of those outages that were blasted all over the world in public view. Because success is sometimes its own downfall. The more successful we become, the more successful we are, the more complacent we can become. Because we've done this before. I've done this before so many times, I can do this with my eyes closed. And this is what usually happens. People tell me, "Lee, I've done this so many times, I can do it with my eyes closed." And I say, "Okay, do it with your eyes closed. Let's see what happens." The lack of investment in what I refer to as the unseen. Organizations and executives will pay for something they can see. You can show them a generator. You can show them a cable. You can't show them the improvement in documentation. You can't show them the improvement in data center skills. You can't show them how these things together help you with your organizational resilience. That's a little bit more difficult to define. And sometimes you find because they can't see it, they're not necessarily prepared to invest in it. Ignoring those near misses. Because the more times you ignore those near misses because you got away with it, you tend to normalize deviation. It's what we refer to as something becoming the new normal. That's the dangerous territory. And we as the humans do this. Machines, it's right or it's wrong. We are the ones that can think this through and say, "Well, you know what, it's still okay. Yeah, we're a little bit off, but..." Something I find quite a lot, ergonomics, the design of your data center, being able to get to a valve, being able to see a gauge, being able to look at things without having to stretch over something else, stuff like that. And when you do these kinds of things and they're out of the way and out of sight, people tend to ignore it. They don't see it. They don't want to. It's too much hassle to go and fetch a ladder and stand on top and have a look at this thing. And of course, standardization. Standardization is a complex issue. To standardize everything in data centers is difficult. But you would like to have the ability that when you walk into one site or another site from the same organization, the things are sort of the same. They standardize. You don't have to retrain somebody. They have to walk in and say, well, on that side it was green, so this side it's blue. Standardization. It eliminates error. Applying the mantra of simplify, simplify, simplify. I always ask continuously, why, how, why, when, what? And when you can stop asking those questions in a policy or a procedure or a document, and it really gets to the point where there's no more questions to ask, you're almost there. Of course, there are other things that we cannot guard against actively. Sometimes these things happen. Malice, sabotage, terrorism. I understand that. But we can still do certain things to mitigate those risks. And there's been numerous discussions this week around those things that have a threat for us. Handheld devices. I'm not so sure. Cell phones, mobiles. Are they an enabler in a data center environment, or are they a distractor? Do you have policies around the use of handheld devices in your data center, even if it is a device that helps you to manage your data center? This is the iceberg of ignorance. That's a little bit small, so I won't ask you because I sort of failed the eye test as well. 96% of what we know at the coalface, at the front of an organization, is not known by senior management. Problems. I can understand that. They have other things to worry about. What scares me, though, is that part. 100% is known at the front line. Only 74% of that gets to the supervisory level. One level up. Now I ask myself, maybe some of those things are solved at the time, so therefore we don't need to. But 26% doesn't get to the next level. And then after that, what gets to the next level, another 65% of that does not reach the middle management level. Imagine if this is your data center. You have 100 problems in your data center or potential threats or vulnerabilities that you've identified. Let's assume you've solved 10, so there's 90 left. 26% of that goes missing. Doesn't even reach the supervisor. And then after that, another 65% doesn't even get to middle management. I don't want to run a data center like that. I don't want to run my organization like that. That's scary. We ignore processes and systems that are implemented to expose risk. They're there. There are policies around risk and all of these things, but we sometimes find ourselves ignoring it. It's what I refer to as a lack of professional openness and constructive disclosure. You must have the strength and the conviction and the culture within your own organizations, within your own data centers, to professionally declare this is wrong. Constructively disclose issues, threats, vulnerabilities, without somebody else becoming defensive and thinking, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to step into my job? Are you accusing me of not doing what I'm supposed to? All of these things. A culture of constructive disclosure. And unfortunately, where I come from, this is difficult because we become defensive when somebody says to you, well, I don't think that's the right way. I always say, listen to their whispers before they begin to shout. So when it comes to everything that contributes to the success of every second of every day, data centers must be ready to respond to anything that happens, whether it's your fault or not. At all times, each and every part of the system must function at its most optimal level, because you just never know. Imagine in that system if just one part did not function at its optimal level. The tragedy. For a mission-critical data center, it's exactly the same. There's no difference. So the takeaways for me today are data centers are actually in the business of trust. When people do things and we provide them with that service, they trust us to deliver. A recipe alone does not guarantee any level of success. You need good skills and experience because they will greatly contribute to the success of your organization and your operation. Relying on resilience and certification and those things alone in a data center is a fallacy, and it is totally misguided. Completely. I'm not saying there's anything wrong in getting data center certified. I do that as part of my business. But I walk in and I see the certification on the wall, and then I go to your operations room and I say, show me your SOPs, your EOPs, your maintenance records, those things, because otherwise that plaque on the wall is of no value to anyone. Documentation is critical for excellence in your data center operation. And having excellent data center system functionality is a powerful differentiator for any organization, for any site. So, publicly declared outages in 2018. Your logo here? Your client's logo here? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any questions? Oh, by the way, from July this year, myself and my family are relocating to Data Center Alley from South Africa, so I'm quite excited about that. So for the moment, it's Johannesburg. Yeah.
So you talk a lot about training, and what's the difference between a formal training from some, like a CNET or something like that, as opposed to your own internal training? Are both of those critical? How do you balance those away?
Full disclosure, I am a licensed instructor for the EPI range of courses that I present on the African continent, CDCP, CDCS. And I always say, the theory is a good start. Any course, not just EPIs. I'm not going to plug them because I'm not allowed to, firstly, and secondly, I think it would be wrong. But what you do with that knowledge afterwards, you take to your site and then you apply it for the site. Yesterday, there was a discussion where site training, site-specific training. I'm busy developing a program and a strategy for a data center organization based in the UK about onboarding their people to train them on the site specifically. And we are going to start with those theoretical courses to get those certifications. But after that, you need to test and train your people to be able to do what is required at the site, and you need to assess them as well, continuously. Practice, practice, practice. Gary Player, South African golfer, used to say, the more I practice, the luckier I get. I think the data center business is the same. Practice, practice, practice. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you deal with the pressure to always perform or right-size your organization in an optimal manner? Because there's always this pressure, like from finance, from sales and marketing. They always
want you involved in other activities, whether
You put your head in the sand and you pray it's going to go away. No, just kidding. Always make sure that whatever comes your way, ask yourself, is this aligned to the strategy of the organization, and how can my strategy within the data center fit into this? Can I make it work? Is it relevant? Because there's a lot of noise when it comes to data center operations. There's a lot of stuff that's not necessary. So wherever you are and whoever you are, you're going to have to figure out your own priorities firstly. And then you must have sometimes the conviction to tell other people, you know what, this sort of doesn't fit into the realm of what we're trying to accomplish right now. Can we deal with this at a later stage? Can we drop it down the priority list? All those kinds of things. Sometimes we must have the conviction to constructively disclose and say, not now. We have to do these other things. Because it's the noise that will cancel everything else out. And then the day that you should be hearing something, it's not. It's the philosophical answer. I can't tell you exactly what needs to be done. But conviction and strategy alignment of data center and everybody else is critical. Any other questions? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.